The order is surprised is coming Sunday. Order is coming Sunday for take the people out. It's impossible because Sunday the office is closed.
I live in Philippi before. You see, I've been attacked and then stabbed everywhere. I can't just show you my scars. So I cannot go back there because I'm afraid of my life.
The city of Cape Town is not insensitive to the plight of the refugees, but we simply cannot allow the situation to carry on unchecked.
Well, good evening and welcome to Unfiltered on SABC 3 and SABC News Channel 404. My name is Desiree Chauke. In a developing story about the removal of refugees from unlawfully occupied spaces, refugees have turned down an offer to be reintegrated into the communities where they came from previously. In the latest, at least 2 people have been arrested in Cape Town following clashes with police. These asylum seekers have threatened to come back and rebuild their structures in the vicinity of the Central Methodist Mission Church and Green Market Square, where they were removed on Sunday. They say they have nowhere else to go. An interdict granted by the Cape Town High Court last week gave the city and the police the green light to remove the refugees and their structures. According to the court order, refugees may not settle elsewhere in the CBD or else risk being in contempt of court. Also, the city citing unsanitary conditions which are in contravention of the city's bylaws. The refugees are demanding, amongst others, to be relocated to other countries as they fear for their safety in South Africa. They've been protesting for months. First outside the UN Refugee Agency offices in St. George's Mall and then at the church. Meanwhile, the United Nations Human Rights Commission for Refugees says that there's no legal possibility of them being relocated to another country. Tonight, we ask, should South Africa shoulder the responsibility of relocating refugees and asylum seekers to other countries? There's already a huge response on our social media platforms, but you can join the conversation on Twitter and Facebook using our hashtags at SABC News Online and SABC News Unfiltered. We welcome our guest now. Well, we'll welcome him later, but Professor Lauren Landau, a senior researcher at the African Center for Migration and Society at Wits University, will be joining us later. He's currently in Oxford at the Oxford University. We also have Dr. Moses Banda from the Africa Diaspora Forum, and we'll also be talking to a colleague from Cape Town later on who is on site with some of the refugees. Tandiswa Mau will be joining us later. But for now, let's welcome Mr. Sibanda. Thank you so much for making the time to come through this evening. The African Diaspora Forum, what are your initial thoughts about developments in Cape Town?
I think it's a very unfortunate situation that should not have been, let to go this far. And I think at the end of the day, in view of the court order that was given, that obviously said the city must enforce its bylaws, which exactly is, very, very correct in terms of the law, because we cannot have a situation where, bylaws are floated by anyone because they've got, particular circumstances that maybe might be bothering them or that they want addressed. But however, as much as we can say that there is a part that various, stakeholders should have, a role that they should have been playing this far, which should have ensured that up to now the situation should have been resolved. So what we have right now is a situation where, the refugees are outside the church and now they have moved closer to the police station. And then you're going to be faced with a situation which says, even if the police are going to come and arrest them and take them where? Take them to the cells? Do they deserve to be put in the police cells? I mean, why would you put them in the police cells? So we've got a catch-22 situation, because even those that are saying, they want to come and rebuild in that vicinity. And if the fear is really that, okay, we're afraid of being attacked, it means that if they come and make a small camp within the vicinity, they could still also, basically get attacked. So we need a very feasible, practical, solution, which is going to, deal with how best, these people can be reintegrated, into society. But, that brings all the stakeholders, particularly the different, spheres of government or stakeholders in government, like social development, Department of Education, because we've got children, and, Home Affairs is doing its part, especially in terms of papers, because, they've been there verifying and probably renewing the documentation. So now, I think we've not been focusing on the other departments, government departments that should be playing their part. And this includes particularly, Department of Social Development.
The kind of involvement obviously brings to question how far do we know about the legality of the individuals, them being in the country, and their processes in terms of applying for asylum. What do we know at this stage?
Well, the mere fact that we still have them where they are, I mean, starting from sometime in November last year, when the first verification was done, when they were removed, you know, from the UNHCR agency, it tells us that it means that these people, the bulk of them have got, you know, proper documentation in terms of, you know, asylum seeker documents, the Section 22, or the full refugee, you know, documentation. So otherwise, if they didn't have that, they would have been arrested and taken to Lindela for repatriation center. We've got a group of others that are at the Lindela repatriation center, and they're only there because, you know, or they need shelter, but they've got documentation. That is why they cannot, you know, obviously be repatriated. So I think now it is a safe assumption that we can all have to say that the bulk of the people that we have, they are properly documented. Otherwise, they would have been arrested, you know, by now.
The demand to be repatriated or to be taken to other countries, it's an internationally legislated aspect of refugee life. How far can South Africa go in this regard?
Look, you know, this has got nothing to do with South Africa. I mean, if the refugees or the asylum seekers want to be taken out of South Africa, that is outside the purview of South Africa. What South Africa has done, you know, in terms of its international obligations and in terms of, you know, the Convention on, you know, the rights of refugees and all that, is that it has given and offered asylum, you know, to the people that were seeking asylum and refugee. Now, if the people feel that it is no longer safe to be in this particular country, you know, it would be unheard of that now the demand can be made to the South African government to say now, please take us outside, you know, this particular country. And I think this is where we basically have a big problem, because from the onset, the UNHCR, when it first opened, you know, cases at the police station and those in Pretoria were arrested, and it started to wash its hands off and say, look, we are here in South Africa at the mercy of the South African government. I think they played, you know, a worming themselves out of, you know, basically responsibility, because when the refugees and asylum seekers said we want to be taken out of South Africa because we feel unsafe, the UNHCR should have led the process of either discussing with government to address the concerns, you know, of the refugee and asylum seekers. But what the UNHCR did is that, you know, it cleverly played itself and say, look, we can't take you anywhere because we cannot afford. You are no longer our problem because you've been given, you know, for example, you know, asylum here, and we don't have a place or a third country where we can take you to. But now, I think this is where the government would have said, look, you know, we are here. We have provided, you know, a sanctuary for the people that they should, you know, stay in the country as asylees or refugee seekers. So if you want to go out, UNHCR, you cannot run away from this. UNHCR should have said, okay, to the South African government, look, there are concerns here. And the concerns that we have, can we discuss and find common ground, how best we can address these concerns? How legitimate are they, and how can they, you know, be ameliorated so that, you know, at least the people feel safe? But the UNHCR, you rarely see them. They are not even in the picture. What we see, I mean, for the last few months has been mainly the Department of Home Affairs, police, and, you know, the municipal authorities. But where is the UNHCR? The UNHCR should be leading in the forefront and saying, refugees and asylum seekers, they are in the purview and the custodianship of the UNHCR. Even if, you know, their demands were not against UNHCR, UNHCR should always, you know, been on the terraces. If they are being given, you know, the asylum, the asylum status or the refugee status, Department of Home Affairs actually confers, and sometimes they even ask UNHCR for guidance and assistance. Yeah. But now UNHCR is AWOL. And that's where the problem is.
In fact, just a reminder that we did invite the Department of Home Affairs and the City of Cape Town, and we're not able to, we didn't succeed in that quest. Let's take a break. We'll be back in a moment.
The court is quite clear what it expects of government, and in this regard, the court has not instructed government to provide additional or accommodation, because it would not be legally or technically possible. You create a range of scenarios that would, I think, aggravate xenophobic violence quite a bit.
Well, we continue our conversation here on Unfiltered about the City of Cape Town. There you just heard the MMC for Safety and Security talking about the process. Let's now bring into the conversation on the line from our Cape Town offices, colleague Thandiswa Mawu. Thandiswa, very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. You've just come back from the police station where some of the refugees have camped out, saying that they would rather be arrested. Tell us about this development.
Yes, Devin, good afternoon. So what happened this afternoon is that they were camping outside one of the open spaces, and then the city police came and moved them. Then they moved to another empty space, and again they were evicted by the sheriff of the court. The sheriff of the court gave them two options. He said, you know what, you need to move out. We give you 2 minutes to move out of this space. You will be getting 2 buses that have been provided, where we will be taken to your previous homes, or you will be arrested for trespassing and taken to a police station. They immediately stood up and said they prefer to go to the police station and be arrested. So that's the position right now. They've been camping outside the police station. They say the police must come and arrest them because they don't have anywhere else to go. It won't help any one of them to go into those drugs that were provided by the city of Cape Town, because where are they going to drop them? While the city says, you know what, the court order didn't ask us to find accommodation for this group of people. So we are within the court, we are playing within the court order that we just need to remove them. We need to implement the bylaws of the city of Cape Town. So that's the position right now. There's regards of camping outside the police station. At the same time, the police now are in a meeting trying to resolve the situation. But what they said is that it's going to be almost impossible for them to arrest the group of people. There's about 200 of them. They are saying most of a large group of the people that are outside the police station are children, and by law they are not allowed to keep children in a police cell. That's the position right now, Desiree.
Are there any of the refugees that have opted to return to their original abode?
None of them at this moment in time. You know what I can say as well, Desiree, is that some of these refugees, while the Human Rights Commission was still involved with them, they were asking some of them to go and register so that they can be relocated to within the communities, to go back to where they are. But what we hear is that some of them, once they do that, they get intimidated and get threatened by the other refugees. So what I would assume is that even if there were those that still wanted to go into those taxis and buses that were provided by the city of Cape Town, it would not be easy for them to do it right in front of everyone else. So what happened there is that nobody took up the offer of the city of Cape Town to get into those buses and be relocated to where they came from initially. So it was not taken up.
Any latest official correspondence from the city of Cape Town?
The city of Cape Town, the only information they gave us is is an update of their arrest, because when they tried to evict this other group from another one of the open pieces of land, they arrested 3 people. So the only update they gave us is that arrest of those 3 people, and also just to reiterate that they are implementing the bylaws of the city, where they don't allow people to sleep, to cook, to live on the street. So that's the only update we have for them right now.
What's the latest on those 3 arrested refugees who, unlike their compatriots, have not have been arrested actually?
Yes, they are still in the police cells. From what we heard now from the group that is stationed outside the police station now, is that they're going to demand that they be released, because one man came to me and said to me, you know, the youngest of them that has been arrested is my son. He said he's 16 years old, but the information we got from the police is that it's a 17-year-old, it's 38-year-old, and 41-year-old. So this man was saying to me his son is 16 years old, he's behind above, and that's not acceptable because he's a minor. So he was also demanding that his son be arrested, be released. But it was a one-man kind of a protest. Nothing much came out of it because the large group that is outside, he wants to go inside the cells.
The concern about unsanitary conditions, what sort of conversation is going on about the living conditions of these refugees while they're camped out in these unlawful spaces?
It's been a concern of many organizations. Remember, the Gift of Givers came in to try and assist them initially when they moved into that space around October. They came in, but there were problems. They had problems with the Gift of the Givers, so the Gift of the Givers pulled out. The city of Cape Town also sent some health officials to come and assist the children because there were concerns about outbreaks of diseases, especially for the children. They chased them away, also saying that, we know where the clinics are. If we need our children to be looked into by health officials, we know where to go. So they also chased them away. So it's been a situation like that. They chase away everyone. We don't know why. But what I can tell you that it has not been very clean and healthy and sanitary around that area. That's why the city of Cape Town was complaining that businesses in that area are moving away. Businesses have signed petitions sent to the city of Cape Town saying, we can't run our businesses anymore. We are losing money. We're losing bookings because there's a very upmarket hotel around that area as well. We are losing a lot of money because of all the people. People are cancelling their bookings around that area because it had become very untidy.
Thandi, so quickly, just finally, do we know when the police are going to come out of that meeting and in terms of decisions going forward?
What I can tell you, we're not sure about when they will finish the meeting. In fact, I just sent them a message about 10 minutes ago. They say, no, they are not ready. They're still discussing the matters. But like I said earlier, they say they are very concerned about arresting women with children because a prison cell, a police cell is not a place to keep a child. So we're not sure. We're just keeping tabs on that one, Desiree.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that update. Thandi Somau is a Cape Town-based colleague who works on radio. Let's take a break. You're watching Unfiltered.
We are homeless and jobless. We have nowhere to go.
Are we expecting someone that is not only in the house to go back to where he was renting before after 5 months of not working?
You're talking every day. Women abuse, child abuse. Every day you're talking about the TV. Women abuse, child abuse. Look this woman. Look this child. Why are you going to abuse us?
You're listening there to the plight of some of the refugees. Welcome once again. You're watching Unfiltered. Our conversation today about developments in Cape Town, law enforcement units in different parts of the city effecting a court order to remove refugees from what is termed as unlawful staying in areas that they've not been given permission to be at. And let's bring back into the conversation Dr. Moses Banda from the African Diaspora Forum, but we're also joined via Skype by Professor Landau from the African Center for Migration Studies. Professor Landau, thank you so much for joining the conversation tonight. I don't know how far up to speed you are with this conversation with the latest in Cape Town, with refugees being removed from certain areas because they're occupying those areas unlawfully. What's the latest conversation about where we can find a middle ground between law enforcement and humanity in terms of dealing with migrants and refugees?
Are you asking me? Well, I mean, I think that what recognize that this is not just an issue about law enforcement in terms of the refugees. We need to be looking back at what over the years in terms of denying court orders, and what has South Africa as a country done in terms of recognizing the rights of refugees, making it difficult for them in the country. I think they have every right to remove people from the area. It's obviously an unsuitable place for them to do. But it's very clear that there is a need to engage in a broader discussion about how the country manages these issues.
That broader discussion includes, Mr. Sibanda, the conversation about having refugee camps. How far are we in this regard?
Well, look, I think that the stance that we have in South Africa that, refugees should not be in refugee camp is actually, it's actually a stage higher than the period in time, where refugees should only be kept, in camps where they are dependent, on government providing them certain, facilities. And I think that the only reason why we're sitting where we're sitting today and we're talking about maybe the refugee camps is because maybe of the xenophobic attacks that we've had, the safety of, maybe refugees or migrants in general. But had it been not for that, I don't think anyone would be advocating, for these, camps, because camps, tend to, create that barrier between people. There is no integration. People still, they would have to stay. Imagine if somebody's got to stay, in a country for 5-10 years and they stay within a camp. So they don't really, you don't bring in that harmony, that integration so that people can live together, as one unit. So I think that the conversation of refugee camps, well, from my point of view, I don't think that it's what we're really looking for. And I don't think that these people are not able to provide for themselves. Again, it would also bring in maybe, an overburdening of, resources, especially, the country is reeling, with service delivery, protests and all that. And all of a sudden, if we have to say the government must then, try and provide these shelters where it looks after these people, I don't know if UNHCR would really provide 100% funding to ensure that the livelihood of these people is properly sustainable. So it's a discussion and a conversation that I think, real derails and takes us away from the real solution that we need here.
So, Professor Landau, the City of Cape Town has offered the refugees assistance with returning them to where they were staying before they came to occupy these spaces. Is this a viable option?
Well, I don't know where each of them was from. Clearly, the refugees are saying that they are fearful of those areas. And what we know is that there have been attacks against people like them in the past, and that very little has been done to ensure that these communities remain safe for South Africans who are living with them. I think the issue, as Savannah was saying, though, is not to think about camps. There are very few refugees in South Africa. The issue.
Okay, Professor Landau, I'm going to have to ask you to hold on to your thoughts there. We need to take a break. Professor Landau is talking to us from Oxford, and we also have Dr. Vusumuzi Sibanda here in the studio. We'll continue with the conversation on the other side of this hour.
It has become a major problem with a serious impact on the surrounding businesses, including the traders on Green Market Square. Furthermore, we're not in a position to provide emergency shelter to the group, given the great need that exists among South Africans, not to mention the precedent that it would set.
Well, that's word from the City of Cape Town. We invited them to this conversation tonight. We also invited the United Nations Human Rights Council, which wasn't also able to make it. We also invited the Department of Home Affairs. But welcome back. Let's take a look at some of your thoughts on social media. Bernard Leboho responding to that question we're asking tonight. Should South Africa bear the cost of repatriating foreigners or refugees who are in South Africa? And Bernard Leboho saying a big no. Our taxes should be used for development of the country and to improve the lives of South Africans. These guys are just taking advantage of liberal rules and generosity. They can't even behave like that or make these kind of demands from their respective countries. If government gives in, that will set a very dangerous precedent. They are not our responsibility. Let's take a look at another thought. Bungane Hatebe saying yes, because everybody knows that South Africa is a banana republic. You demand the impossible things and government gives it to you. I suppose being facetious there, Geli Sitole saying all those who had their countries destroyed by Europe must be accommodated in countries of their choice in Europe. Right, a final one from Solomon Tandogazi saying no, they shouldn't. These people come on their own. Why must we carry them now? A lot is happening in our country that needs our attention. Those are some of your thoughts. Let's get back into the conversation and bring in Dr. Moses Banda. The refusal of the refugees to go back to where they were previously, does this not play into the narrative that South Africa is Afrophobic?
Well, it probably does in a huge way, because what we're saying, when they refuse, I mean, to start with, to say, okay, we don't want to go back because we feel unsafe. And again, I think at this stage, that's why I'm saying it's a little bit too late. And I think the various stakeholders, have allowed this thing to play a little bit too long, without taking responsibility. And right now, as one of the refugees was saying that, look, where do we go back to? Because the truth of the matter now is, even if they had places where they were staying, but at this stage, 5 months down the line, we don't expect that they should have, those places that they can easily go back to those particular places. But now, if they would have to go back into the community, it would have to be a system, something that's systematic, that needs a process, of engaging with them. And when they go try and find accommodation. If they are renting, whatever it is, it's got to be something that's got to be done, after there is an understanding between them, so that they can go on their own. But as long as it's done, with this confrontational approach, where they also feel that they are being pushed and they're pushing back, we're not going to come up with a solution. So we need real people to come together. We need government to come down and say, look, we've got children that are not going to school 5 months down the line that should have been, in school. And I don't know, again, if the government, of South Africa would not have taken certain steps if these, maybe were South African children that were being kept, out of school, even if, albeit it's the decision of the parents, because we also know that the court is, the upper guardian of the children. And we have not seen a stand in that particular regard to try and say, where are the interests of these children? They are growing to become part of, members of our society, and what kind of people are bringing up that will not have had an education. So yes, I think, we need a situation urgently that will try and bring, around the table kind of a discussion. Let the people realize that, look, it's probably not possible maybe to take them wherever they want to go to, but government must also concede in terms of how are these people going to be protected? What laws are, how are laws, what's going to happen in the event that there is an attack, so that, they feel safe, they feel that government is playing its role. Because as long as people feel that government doesn't really, play its role in protecting, the welfare and interests, of the refugees or asylum seekers whenever there is an attack, then the people will say, we don't want to go back there. So we need a serious discussion in that particular area.
Professor Landau, you're in the UK at the moment. What are the sort of conversations that are going on about South Africa and its treatment of refugees?
Well, I think across the world, South Africa has been lauded for taking people and recognizing that it has the role to play in protecting people across the continent. I think that there is a frustration and a concern about what's happening. Cape Town, of course, is a place many people from the UK will have gone. And I think many people are sympathetic to all sides. The solution to this problem started, as we've been hearing, not something that we can deal with now, just there. It means thinking through how South Africa settles people, how South Africa manages its townships, and trying to find ways in which people can live peacefully, whether they're South African of different groups or whether they're refugees.
So when you look at the legal side, the humanitarian side, how do you straddle this conundrum?
Well, if you ask me, I think what we need to do is enforce the law. But that's a law that applies to everyone. So it's a law that applies to the Department of Home Affairs. South Africa has signed international law and amendments about protecting these people. And it also applies to ensuring that people who are governing the townships do not evict, do not attack, do not hurt or appropriate property without due process. So I think that the solution is in the law. In the short term, we just need to find a place for these people to go and be safe.
Dr. Spandaso, you're nodding your head there. Do you agree?
Completely. I think, I couldn't have put it much better. The issue is the law plays a very big, role in this, problem. We need the law to be applied uniformly across the board. We need to see a situation where if, refugees or migrants are attacked, we need to see the law, we need to see people being prosecuted. We need to see the police going full force if there is burned down buildings, people have been attacked and people get getting arrested and prosecuted, because that will then serve as a deterrent, which is one of the purposes of basically arresting people that break the law. That it should be seen that if you do this, you kill any other human being, then you're going to be arrested. But if it is seen that look, there is a relaxation in the application or even prosecution of these people, then it actually is seen as if the government is condoning this lawlessness. So we definitely need
Should we be concerned about how far it's gone? You heard the conversation with our colleague earlier on, who was at the police station. The refugees now daring the police to arrest them, kind of creating a situation where law enforcers might be scared to carry out their work.
Well, you see, what is happening now is, I think, again, unfortunately, this is the problem of a confrontational, environment, because now the people are saying, okay, fine, they'll arrest us, and then at least, they will take us away from the streets to start with, because they'll have to provide, accommodation, and when they provide accommodation, the whole world is going to be looking at us to see, how sanitary are those conditions or places where we're going to be placed in. So in a way, it's a catch-22 situation for the government. They say we're not going to provide accommodation, because we don't have it, but on the one hand, if they have to arrest them, which the refugees have become alert to, they know that they'll have to house them in whatever, environment where they'll take them. And again, they'll have to answer to the fact that, under what law have they been arrested? We have not seen, homeless people in South Africa being arrested for being homeless or basically sleeping in the bridges and taken in. So again, that's the law that's coming into play. So you can basically see that the daring part is actually saying, we are safer coming to you so that you can arrest us if you want to arrest us, if you're not going to give us alternative accommodation.
Professor Landau, you were saying earlier that there's international regulation, and South Africa seemingly has fairly sophisticated laws in terms of how to deal with these kind of issues. What is the holdup in terms of implementation then?
Well, I think the holdup in terms of implementation comes from multiple places. One is that a lot of the rights legislation, whether it applies to refugees or it applies to South Africans, is not implemented, whether it's access to housing, access to water, education, etc. Some of it is that the Department of Home Affairs has disobeyed court orders in terms of issuing documentation for taking care of these people. And of course, South African, the townships who've attacked them have not been held accountable. So the law is very clear about these people's position in the country, but that requires the law to be implemented.
Dr. Sibanda, are you finding that part of the constituency that you represent struggle with the processing of documentation?
Oh yes, by all means. I think one of the biggest problems that we have obviously is the processing of documentation, the time periods and even the processes, that take place when the people go, to apply for documentation, the queues that they have. I heard today they had to be chased away because it was raining and because obviously the systems were down, and in many cases, Home Affairs systems are always offline. So people don't get, attended to in time, and some of the documents end up basically, expiring because Home Affairs has not really played its part. And we've got people that are holding onto Section 22 permits, which are supposed to be only held for a maximum of 6 months. And these people have been holding them for 10 years, 14 years. And then after 10 years...
14 years?
19, not only 14. I've got a few that have had it for 19 years. And in 19 years, this person is qualified for permanent residence and the person is qualified for citizenship. And now, after 19 years, the Department of Home Affairs will come to the party and say, look, we have finally decided that, we are rejecting your application, you may go back. I don't know where you expect a person that has spent 19 years who has not been able to visit any other country. They are cooked up in because with a Section 22, you cannot get out of the country. And then you are saying to this person, all of a sudden, get out of this country. Where to? So you understand that the Home Affairs is always shooting itself on the foot because, what it is actually doing, comes back to bite it. And the documentation system, I think, is the biggest problem that we have.
So one would imagine that the forum engages with Home Affairs in this regard. How are these conversations progressing?
Well, look, we have established, a bit of a report in terms of discussing, especially with the various departments, like, the refugee center, when there are problems, when people go to apply for documentation. But we're also looking at a situation now. One of our biggest, I think, goals now is to get to a situation where we say we've had people that have been holding these Section 22s for over 10, 5 years, what needs to happen now? And the view is basically that maybe it might actually make a lot of sense to say, maybe let's get the court to help us, because, you know, when the legislator says, you know, after 5 years, someone must apply for permanent residence, it means that what was the purpose, you know, for that legislation? It is basically saying if somebody has stayed for 5 years, it's a long period of time. It means they've cut ties with the places where they're coming from. Even if someone has got a work permit, they're allowed to apply for permanent residence. What more to an asylum seeker who's not allowed to go out of the country? This person has naturally become a South African resident.
Is integrated into community.
Exactly.
Professor Landau, what are the latest conversations taking place? Most of the regulations and the conventions that determine the existence of refugees were enacted in the 50s and a long time ago. What sort of new conversations are taking place right now in terms of how to treat refugees? There's new conversations now, like the coronavirus outbreak. How are these conversations impacting conversation about regulation?
Yeah, well, of course, South Africa's refugees laws are only from the 1990s, so they're not so old. But there are, of course, global discussions going on right now about how to deal with refugees. And we've seen Greece, for example, trying to close it against people coming over from Turkey. These are global issues, and of course, South Africa has many who are coming. Unfortunately, we're not having a pragmatic discussion, as in Europe, as in the United States. These are discussions that are being driven by fear and paranoia, racism, xenophobia, rather than a sort of objective look at a common humanity and a sort of practical solution.
But in terms of progression, how far, especially in terms of the academic contribution, is there any progress?
Well, I think that there's a need to recognize, and there is a recognition, that people's movement is part of how we get ahead in this world. We're going to see increasing precarity, whether it's environmental or economic. People will need to move, and political systems are fragmenting in many places, and they're going to be fleeing and looking for protection elsewhere. I think what the recognition is that rather than people in camps for years and years, we need to see people arriving as something that is part of a normal process, integrate them into communities, make sure that they can access jobs and services like everyone else, and help build a common future.
How do we approach the conversation relating to the fact that whenever there are these events, invariably it's about Black people?
Well, I think this is where we have our biggest problem, that, you know, whenever we deal with issues of people that are being attacked, it's mainly, you know, the Black people. We know that it has to do, of course, with the scramble for resources and the mere fact that, you know, they live in the community where there is poverty, where there is, you know, lack of, you know, service delivery. And obviously, you know, the people that, you know, feel affected by these things, they'll take off this frustration to the next person that is easily available. So in order for us to deal with this, we might need a broader discussion that might actually look at basically saying, you know, South Africa as a country is, you know, better off in terms of democracy and some of the principles, unlike some of the African countries. And maybe the question might be, now that, you know, the president of South Africa is the chair of the AU, can the president be bold enough to take, you know, and I mean, to take this big elephant into the room at the AU to say, but Africa, what is happening? Are we really looking after our people? Why are our people moving away from these countries? So there is a broader discussion which we need to look at to say, you know, why do we really have everybody trekking down to South? I mean, why don't we have, you know, laws that are as enabling, that are also attractive in other, you know, African countries? Why do we have people running away from these countries? You know, what exactly is going on? You know, what are the principles of democracy and elections? We've seen a lot of things like what has been happening in Malawi recently, you know, what happened in Nigeria towards the elections and the DRC. That tells us that there are a lot of things that are not going right. So as long as we are not happy to have that uncomfortable discussion to confront these people that are called, you know, leaders, that allow, you know, or lead to situations where people run away from these countries, this problem is not going anywhere. And South Africa is always going to be seen. You know, South Africa is going to come in the spotlight because everyone is here, and because South Africa has got a much more open, you know, democratic system. So people will be able to vent out and say things here. And South Africa might even be seen as one of the worst countries, but in actual fact, it is because South Africa is like, you know, I mean, a lantern that's put on the mountaintop so everybody can easily see, because it's relatively much transparent, but it's not real that there is a big problem with South Africa in comparison to all of these African states.
You're watching Unfiltered. We're in a conversation with Dr. Sibanda, who's from the African Diaspora Forum, and also with Professor Landau, who's from the African Center for Migration Studies. Stay with us as we continue this conversation after this break.
These people, they're staying 5 months. They don't have a place to go.
Those people were sleeping here for 4 months. So that 4 months, and we don't get free housing. And even if you are renting, there's nobody can keep the house for 4 months for you.
These people, our rights, I don't like this country, like leave South Africa. So if somebody is coming at your house, he's tired, he said, no, I cannot leave now. So give him chance, I must go out. Where you cannot kidnap the people, you kidnap the refugee here by the South Africa. It's very wrong.
It's an intricate and complex humanitarian, legal and otherwise issue, but we're going to try our best. We have been trying for the past hour to try and unravel it. But the question we were asking you is if South Africa should foot the bill for repatriating some of the refugees who have asked to be sent to other countries. And Jabulani Molodzi saying South Africans voted in 1994 for democratic elected government for South African citizens to be first priority. There are countries within the continent who got their independence in the 1960s. No one pressured them regarding their immigration policies and how to safeguard borders. Swapo Fobo saying the UNHCR can take that responsibility. The only thing South Africa can do is to make sure they're safe from the dangers that may occur, but the foreigners must comply and go back to the communities and stop being silly, I suppose. But the only responsibility of South African government is to take them to Lindela to be repatriated to their countries, not to somewhere else that they can do for themselves. I think we have another one from Anwar Chauhan who says, no, if you're going to do it once, they expect it to be done again and again. South African government has allowed the situation to deteriorate and have no one else to blame, resulting in total destruction of inner cities. Moeketsing Duga saying being a refugee doesn't grant you special status above that of the citizens of the host country. The law applies to everyone in the country. There's a huge housing backlog and a high unemployment rate. All of the above affect everyone without exception. Those are some of your thoughts. Let's bring back our guests into the conversation. Professor Landau, let me come to you with the same question that I asked Mr. Sibanda earlier. The inevitable occurrence that when these events happen, the affected people are invariably black people. This is problematic, isn't it?
Well, of course. I mean, what we need to recognize is that these conflicts are happening in the poorer part of the country, and they are rooted in the poor governance of these areas, right? So people they're coming from Africa, they're coming from Asia, they're coming from Somalia, elsewhere, into South Africa, and they're settling with people. And I think the solution to this is not to put one against the other, but rather to say, what are we doing for these areas, whether it's the inner city, whether it's the townships? How do we address these so that people are not angry, so that they're not taking out their frustrations on their neighbors, but are actually moving ahead, asking for services, receiving services, and can work together? The issue here is not our foreigners jumping the queue. The issue here is not our foreigners getting something that South Africans are not. They're living in an area where no one is really getting anything. And I think that's the problem.
The other conversation that comes up is the differentiation between migrants and refugees. And when you come from an organization such as the African Diaspora Forum, I imagine some of the people you represent are foreigners who are well integrated into South African societies, are making a living. What is this voice saying about assisting refugees?
I think it's a bit problematic in the sense that all these people are, found, within the context of people that are not within their home country because of, various, circumstances and situations. And obviously, once you deal with refugees and asylum, seekers, these are people that are specially protected now, by, the laws that deal with refugees. And as a result, the other migrants might actually feel a bit more envious at some stage. Say, hey, these guys, at least, they can make their voice because they've got a law that really protects them. They can get stuff
for free.
They can get stuff for free, you understand? But when you look at an ordinary migrant who has got maybe a work permit of some sort or anything else, they just have to fight, along the way, pick themselves up and know that there is no special protection that is, accorded to them. So it creates, a bit of, an issue. But hey, that's...
They do enjoy a certain level of ability to speak, though.
The migrants?
Yes.
Well, they do, but, at the end of the day, it's only basically, if somebody, for example, stands up today and say, look, we are being attacked and I'm a migrant, for example, I've got a work permit, one will probably say, why don't you go back to your country if you find that this country is not good? Because you came here, you're looking for greener pastures, you're looking for safety, and obviously because you can't find it, just ship out and go out. You're nobody's responsibility. Whereas, with the refugees and asylum seekers, because they have fled a situation that they cannot go back to, so at least they can stand some ground and say, but wait a minute, I can't go back to my country not because of my own making, but because there's a situation that kicks me out of the country, and that's why I've got this protection. So, that gives them a bit of an upper hand in terms of, being, boisterous and voicing, their concerns.
Professor Landau, to what extent can the migrants have a voice?
Well, I think that migrants should have a voice, like everybody else. They're part of your community. You need to hear from them. The South African government is now proposing legislation that would make any kind of political activity by refugees or migrants illegal, which I think is both against the principles of the Constitution, but also bad for our society. What we should be asking for is everyone who is here should be able to make their concerns known. That's how we learn about each other. That's how we learn what's happening in our communities. So whether it's refugees or whether it's migrants, if they are here, from them. What we decide to do in response, I think, another matter.
Do you have suggestions in terms of, by the way, of solutions?
Well, I think with this particular situation, I think the government needs to really, come to the party, not in terms of, these court orders, and, taking each other to court. I think the issue, if we look at what happened, I think the last week when there was, the court order was given, one of the leaders said, look, we have got certain demands if we're going to go back, to the communities. I think he listed about 4 of them. Now, I mean, if you compare that with the position that was held in October, November, which was more hardline and saying we don't want anything else but to be taken out of the country, it means, I think at this stage, people are ready to sit down and talk. And I think the government needs to recognize that and take this opportunity to say, let's get all the stakeholders, let's sit down, let's see what exactly is required. And, once that is brought to the table, I think this situation is going to be resolved and it's going to be something that, is forgotten about. But for as long as, it continues like this, it's going to be painting South Africa as a country in bad light, and it's not going to be, helping, the relations between, refugees and asylum seekers and, the ordinary, native South Africans. Because at the end of the day, the animosity, the cruelty, people are also feeling that, look, we're spending a lot of time, on these refugees. That is why you see some of the comments are saying, these people need special attention. But it's not that they need special attention. It's basically that the people that are saying that themselves, they feel that they've got issues that should be attended to. And now they feel that even at time, imagine on television, you guys are always talking about these refugees, but we are native South Africans. You should be talking about my issue, I don't have a house, I don't have this and that. Why are you talking about them? And in any case, these people did not even say they want houses, and somebody's already saying, no, but we have a problem with housing. So you realize that, it keeps creating even, those fissures and those, problems amongst, between the natives and the refugees.
Professor Landau, do you think South Africans are unsympathetic to the plight of refugees?
I think many South Africans are deeply sympathetic. I think South Africans recognize the desperate situation, and those who feel that those who are among the poorest of South Africa, in most instances, are lending a hand. They will welcome people into their community, and they will help them to access the same meager services and opportunities that they have. Of course, South Africans have recognized that if you mobilize against migrants, you also get something. And what the migrants are doing is out of that playbook of trying to be loud, of trying to protest, because that's how you get attention. But I don't think that most South Africans are sympathetic. I think many people would like everyone to be able to live peacefully and safely in their communities.
Yes, thank you again for staying up to talk to us. Professor Landau coming to us from Oxford University, and also Dr. Vusumuzi Sibanda from the African Diaspora Forum. Thank you so much for making the time to talk to us tonight. It's a continuing conversation. As you heard, the South African Police Service in a meeting to decide what the way forward will be. So South African SABC News will continue to bring you the latest on the story. Thanks for watching Unfiltered tonight. Till next Monday, it's a goodbye.